lecture is going to be on infant development. So we're looking at children from the time that they are born to the newborn period, all the way until about a year-ish. Some walking, maybe a word or two, and then we'll move on to toddler development. We'll be talking about the birth process, and then just that real early newborn period right after they're born, the first couple weeks when their states of arousal are really sleepy. Then we'll move more into physical development, so 0 to 12, cognitive development, social emotional development 0 to 12 as well. Interspersed in that will be some pre-seed, proceed models, talking about postpartum depression and other kind of issues with children with special needs, and how this model is being used in some community health interventions for real young children. Then at the very end, I have a specific pre-seed, proceed case study from Iran. So in the birth, postpartum, and newborn period, I'm really interested in kind of the customs that surround childbirth and the postpartum period, because it really reflects our own specific cultures, beliefs, our values, and our resources, how we give birth, how we prepare for childbirth, and then how we treat ourselves and other people treat us in that postpartum period really reflects the culture that we are living in right now, and also the beliefs and values and resources. And then that matters to children, because how people who have just delivered are taken care of, and how they take care of the infant really reflects the culture's beliefs about children, and about their kind of how they place importance on children. So some of the things I'll talk about: the birth process, postpartum period, labor and birth complications, then that newborn period, and then their parents. So we don't actually know kind of what triggers the birth process. So we know that there's hormonal changes. And so the placenta, the organ that surrounds the child, kind of triggers a decline in progesterone and then an increase in cortisol and estrogen, and cortisol being that stress hormone. So we do not know that it goes up typically within the last 2 weeks of labor. And we do kind of have some tests, fetal fibronectin tests, that kind of can give a little bit of an idea when you might go into labor as well, but we don't actually know why it happens, which if you've ever been around somebody in their last couple weeks of pregnancy can be really frustrating, not really knowing when it's going to happen. The weight of the child is really bearing down on you. We are thinking now as well, when I was pregnant with my last, there might be some metabolic issues, so you can no longer take in enough calories to support you and the child at the same time. It becomes really hard to eat. There's not enough stomach room. You can't take in enough calories. So that, I remember reading that had been hypothesized when I was in the last couple weeks of my pregnancy. And then that's when people start doing some really crazy old wives' tales. I was trying anything and everything that anybody had ever told me. Scrubbing my kitchen floor on my hands and knees because that had worked for a friend, making labor cookies that have cayenne pepper in them. I got a midwife to check me, and then I walked as much as I could around a park that was really steep. That actually did work. I went into labor the next day. Who knows if it worked? But I was trying a bunch of things because I was 39 weeks and I was done being pregnant, and she was already 8 pounds. But the stages of labor: dilation, getting to 10 centimeters, the child coming out, and then the third stage of labor that most people forget about is the expulsion of the placenta. So the placenta needs to leave the body after you've given birth, and this is where a lot of complications with birth can arise as well. If it gets stuck in there, if parts of it need to stay in there, that's where complications for the mother can arise as well. So as I was talking about before, we have a lot of societal ideas about birth, and it depends a lot on our culture and our race and our socioeconomic status, which definitely reflects our access to healthcare. And it's changed a lot through history as well, especially with our ability, like I said, to access healthcare. That's why I have kind of that picture of that woman with the bright orange safety vest on, listening to the infant. I was reading that in Haiti, there's now a nonprofit that's trying to get solar-powered birth packs to birth attendants or midwives. So if you were in a place that didn't have electricity, especially after these last hurricanes that we have, or you were in hospitals that might lose power because of generators, or just kind of the power grid still being put back on the island, as well as in Puerto Rico as well, being able to use solar power so that you can continue to see the birth process is really, really important. Or for some of these midwives and birth attendants who travel throughout the country in very, very rural areas, they can use it as a backpack and go into the home and help with the family. So we are making sure that healthcare has some equality. That's something that a lot of people are working for, is trying to make sure that birth outcomes change and become more equal by having access to healthcare. I do want to talk about the stillbirth and neonatal deaths. So a stillbirth is any death after 20 weeks gestation. It can be discovered through prenatal care or by the parent realizing that fetal movement has decreased, or sometimes it happens at delivery as well. The best thing, though, and why I kind of harp on this idea of healthcare, prenatal healthcare, and then afterwards as well, is because through prenatal ultrasounds, fetal monitoring, and prenatal surgery, it's actually the stillbirth rate has fallen dramatically since 1990 here in the United States. There are other places in the world, like Papua New Guinea, that 1 in 7 women still die in childbirth in the 2000s. And any neonatal death is a death of a child within the first 28 days of life, and postpartum mortality as well. And that's why medical intervention after birth is so important as well. So if there were health complications of the mother or the child, that we could intervene and help as much as possible in those times right after birth, and then accessing prenatal care, especially ultrasounds and fetal monitoring, so that we can make sure that the stillbirth rate continues to plummet. I have had a couple friends have stillbirths of their own, and so there's old school methods, which is called like a kick count. So in your last couple weeks of pregnancy, every night typically you just count to make sure that the child is continuing to kick and move and having a lot of movement. And so one of my friends noticed that she wasn't feeling any movement. We went to the hospital, and unfortunately they had already lost the child. So that's why we use a variety of methods in order to kind of try to figure out why the child is stopping or decreasing their movement, so that we can care for him. Sometimes done. The pre-seed-proceed model, since it is kind of a community health intervention, so they have looked at Qatar, so a Middle Eastern country, or Eastern Mediterranean country, depending on how you want to classify it, is using the pre-seed-proceed model as an organizing template to do kind of a literature review. So instead of doing their actual own intervention, they were looking at reports and literature reviews and studies, looking at stillbirth prevention in Qatar, and then specifically looking in the low, middle, and high income, and I wrote countries, but I meant counties or districts of Qatar. So what they were really looking at was nursing students, and then asking them the question, what strategies are effective in preventing stillbirth? So through a variety of methods, they were trying to use the pre-seed-proceed model more as a literature review or a study review in order to kind of figure out what the next steps would be for preventing stillbirth. Then some labor and birth complications. On the left-hand side, I have a graph that goes over some of the neonatal mortality. So that's in the first 28 days. Most of them are preterm birth complications. So the cord being wrapped around your neck, or knots in the cord, that type of thing. Then there's sepsis, which is in that green, and that's infections like Group B and strep. Those are things that you should be tested for in your last couple weeks of pregnancy. So if you did have strep B, it's important that you start an antibiotic as you are delivering, so that you're not accidentally passing on this infection to the child as they pass through the birth canal, because they obviously don't have any resistance when they're first born to any kind of infection. If they do get it, it can lead to sepsis and death. Then there's in purple RSV, whooping cough, flu, pneumonia, that type of stuff as well. So that's another reason why healthcare is really important in the last 6 weeks of pregnancy. I got the whooping cough shot in both of my pregnancies. My husband got it in my first, and my in-laws and my parents got it as well. We knew we were going to be bringing on some very small little twins who would have no resistance to this, and they were also born in the late fall, which is kind of flu season. So we were trying to protect everybody around them so we could have that herd immunity, so that they would be protected themselves until they were old enough to get it. And then there's other reasons as well, causes of neonatal mortality, diarrhea, tetanus, and then other issues as well. And this applies a lot more to developing nations as well, where diarrhea is an issue. Then on the right-hand side, I just have some complications that might not necessarily lead to death, but are complications and a reason that a child would be targeted as needing early intervention early in life, or need to stay in the hospital more. One is jaundice, which is linked with the blood type of the parent. I am a type negative, and my children are positives, and they all had jaundice. I also spent 3 to 5 days in the hospital treating them for that. But another reason why healthcare is so important. If you didn't know about it, a child actually passed away this year, I believe. There was a home birth. The midwife informed the family that the child was orange and most likely had jaundice. The family chose repeatedly, after people tried to intervene, not to get treatment for it. And by the time somebody made a decision to call the paramedics and get them over to the house, the child had passed away. The liver cannot handle it. If it becomes too much, it becomes toxic, and the brain actually has to shut down from the level of bilirubin that's in the blood. Then there's some issues that could target us possibly for intervention, either a very low birth weight, and that can happen because of a multiple pregnancy like mine, where I had a couple 4 and 5 pounders, or small from gestational age, which is more of an issue. So in my early intervention work, quite a few of my children, one of the first indicators that there might be a delay or a special need was that they were small for gestational age. They were born 38, 39, 40 weeks, so full term, but then they were 3 to 4 pounds, and that's really unusual that you would get to that far gestation and be such a small child in just a regular pregnancy. So that's a good predictor of both an infant's ability to survive, and then also on my link to if there is going to be any delays as well. And sometimes children will be referred over to our early intervention at 3 or 4 months in order to kind of look at why these issues are happening. Then prematurity, and this is actually, I have 4 preemies that I'm seeing right now. So one set of twins was born at 25 and a half weeks, and then 2 individual children were born at 24 weeks, which is technically viability. So if a child is born at 24 weeks gestation, or after, they have a pretty good shot of surviving. Not always, but they definitely have more of a chance after 24 weeks. But anything before 37 is considered premature, and you're going to spend some time in our neonatal intensive care unit, our NICUs. And there's definitely an added risk for developmental delays, and you're most likely leaving the hospital either being linked with a high-risk infant clinic where you go and you get assessed very regularly in case you do need intervention, or you just leave with intervention as well. So physical and occupational therapy, early intervention like myself, and then they'll need consistent medical monitoring for those lungs, the heart, the brain, and the eyes. Those are kind of the systems that needed the most time to kind of grow. And so we're noticing that that's where a lot of them wear glasses, they need a heart surgery, their lungs, they're isolated, they get the RSV shot up until age 3. And the article reflection this week that I have is on NICU and skin-to-skin contact. So then the screenings, there's the APGAR test, which looks at 1 and 5 minutes after birth to see if any medical intervention support. And then why I kind of bring that up is it could indicate some brain damage. Not always. One of my twins had a very low APGAR. Her second one was better. But she just had a rough delivery process as a second twin. She doesn't have any brain damage now, but it could indicate that, and it could have indicated that she would have needed intervention services. Then the Brazelton scale, and I bring this up because it really looks at reflexes and alertness level and motor ability, and that's really kind of all we can assess in the very, very young stages. And that's why I bring it up with development, is because we know that reflexes, when the reflexes are present and when they are extinguished, how alert they are, and just their very early motor ability is the most kind of development we're going to get from a child in the very beginning. They're not rolling over, they're not sitting up, they're not talking, they're not smiling, they rarely make eye contact, their eyes flutter a lot. It can make, have some kind of unusual movement. So how do we kind of look at the development of a child? And so for medical professionals, the Brazelton scale, because it's really, really looking at those reflexes, because they should leave at a very specific time, how alert a child is, and then their kind of motor ability as well. And then I also neonatal screenings, blood screenings, and then what your regular well child visits, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months are really important as well to make sure that children are growing medically, health-wise, their wellness is increasing, and then also developmentally as well. I had issues with my twins at 18 months, and we went in and we had a discussion about speech and therapy. And my children went into speech and therapy just for a little bit. So one of them just finished because she was having some articulation errors. The words and sounds that she was being able to say, she could say a lot of words, sounds that she was making were not correct. She actually just left. This is her first year in kindergarten and she just stopped. So even for people like us who know about children, the well child visits really help as far as making sure that our children are healthy. They maybe are seeing things that we are not seeing. At-risk populations. So I talked about this, so I've been kind of harping on health access because we do know that there are some real at-risk populations, and there's definitely disparities in health as well. So African Americans, unfortunately, have one of the highest rates of stillbirth. They most consistently have children with lower birth weights, and they're more likely to be born premature and then die from a variety of causes within the first year. And so we see this and we realize this is a huge disparity in health outcomes for mothers and for children, all not even neonatal deaths, but within the first year. So there's this Black Infant Health Program down in San Diego, and they're fantastic. They also have a lot of bus ads as well. You'll see a really cute baby on the side of a bus, and they're really, really fantastic. And when some of my own friends who are African American have gotten pregnant, I typically refer them to this program. Not only do they do research, but they're a great place of support and advocating for yourself in the health process. But I think societally as well, we need to advocate and make sure that there's enough research being done and that there are interventions done as well, most likely through the Proceed movement, in order to kind of address these disparities in healthcare access so that children have the ability to reach their full potential no matter their race. We also have some other at-risk populations, and teenagers are one of them. First of all, from just their growth standpoint, so 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds who are younger, who are getting pregnant, have not grown themselves. They might not have gone through the entire adolescence process. Their hips are not maybe wide enough to support pregnancy, so there are health risks. And then there are kind of the risks from their brain development. They haven't developed completely in their brain. They're still a little bit immature, and they might make choices like not getting prenatal care, hiding pregnancies. You heard those stories about delivering at prom, or just missing them consistently, which can lead to worse health outcomes as well. Preeclampsia can be a real issue in teenagers that they could ignore if they're not being monitored, which then can affect the fetus as well. Other at-risk populations would be multiple pregnancies. Since I have twins, I've gone through that. It's just a lot of extra monitoring with perinatology, just to make sure we want to prevent those premature births if at all possible. If you're overweight and obese at the beginning of your pregnancy as well, you're going to need a little bit more health monitoring as well, just to make sure that gestational diabetes is prevented or managed, and then there could be some birth complications as well. And then those with prior medical complications like diabetes, MS, things like that. If you've seen the movie from the 80s, Still Magnolias with Julia Roberts, I gave a huge spoiler in one of my child development classes on that movie, so I'm not going to do it again, but it's her dealing with a medical complication when she gets pregnant. her family in the South. But no spoilers for you guys. And then socioeconomic status, especially homeless and drug exposed individuals. And then low for birth weight is associated with socioeconomic status, the number of prior pregnancies, the age of the mother, race, diet, nutrition, prenatal care, medical conditions before and after pregnancy. And I was trying to find some pre-seed, proceed model things on this low for birth weight because it encompasses so many factors. I wasn't able to find any in a quick couple searches, but I might be going to the library for subsequent classes because I see this as a real area where our pre-seed, proceed model could either be doing literature and case study reviews as an organizing factor, or it could be looking at these as possible areas for intervention. Then the newborn physically, so they're tiny, tiny little things. I've got this picture of this real cute little baby nursing, but he's also very blotchy. He's got acne. He's all kind of scabby. He's super, super red. He's got a receding chin that you can't really see, but his chin definitely doesn't have the same profile as an adult or an older infant, so that they can breastfeed, so they can create a latch, have their nose really stuck on there, and still be able to breathe. And then they're most likely very hairy as well. You can see he's very hairy. They'll be covered in Linago, or they can be covered in like vernix, which is kind of the creamy stuff right after you're born. Newborn behaviors, this is what I was talking about. Their development is really, really different than an older infant. There's that regular sleep, that's super, super deep sleep, and that's why I've got this picture of this cutie right here with the Santa hat on. Kids, like in a photo shoot, he's got cameras clicking, bright lights, ring lights, totally dead asleep, isn't gonna wake up, you know, running the vacuum cleaner. Irregular sleep is like if you're holding somebody's baby and somebody talks too loud, or mom talks and the baby smiles or jumps or has a reflex. And then drowsy, they're open, they're sleeping, they're awake, they're smiling, they might be trying to nurse, but eyes are kind of fluttering up and down. And then alert in activity, they're open, they're watching their environment. This is a great time for us to be doing the tummy time, putting them on their backs, and more specifically, rolling them over onto their stomachs. Since we do safe sleep for all children, so they're on their back in a crib without anything around it, it's really important when they are alert to put them on their stomach from a very young age, a week or two out, so that they can start to kind of work on their neck control, their head control, and working on that physical development. A lot of times they can't get that because they're in their cribs on their back. Then waking in activity, crying, distressed, and kicking. You might want to try tummy time at the beginning of this, but most likely you're calming the child down so that they can nurse at that point, or feed at that point. Talking about, you know, times and cultures and how we raise children. You know, my dad, I was born in 1981, and so my dad, at that point, it was tummy to sleep. That was the safest way for children to sleep, was in their own crib, without blankets. They knew that kind of stuff, and without pillows, but on your stomach. So when my twins were born, kind of re-educating him, like, no, they definitely go on their back, and you never put them on their stomach in those first couple weeks when they're first born. The newborn and their parent, that's me and my youngest daughter when she was first born. So we're looking at their parents. I'm talking about mothers and fathers kind of specifically right now, but the family structure matters less. So 2 mothers, 2 fathers, 1 mother, 1 father, extended families, that is just as important. It's more the family support that a child is receiving that's going to have more of an impact than the actual family structure. But I do talk about mothers and fathers because I'm talking about 2 kind of physiological differences that could happen. So we know that our frontal cortex, so the front part of our brain, lights up. It's like a Christmas tree. It's right after somebody gives birth. Their brain does go through changes. And this is so that we crave close contact and attachment with the child that we've just delivered. And that's why giving a child up for adoption can be so difficult. Your brain and your hormones are working against you. Evolution has made us do these things in order to kind of protect our children by wanting this close contact and attachment. And that's why it can be so difficult for people who do choose to give up their child for adoption. And then we know that fathers change their physiology changes a bit as well, going through the process of pregnancy with their partner. But they need not be present at birth to form strong bonds. Part of my work at Palomar is I teach this class kind of similar to this without the precede-proceed model. But I talk about development with Marines and their wives, so dependents. So the role of father is definitely influenced by your culture, but you need not be present. So for my Marines that have deployed or are not present during the pregnancy, their physiology isn't going to change. But the most important thing is that parent positive involvement and parental environment involvement is started, and it's positive, and that leads to better outcomes in all areas of development. So that's kind of what I tell my fathers. But once again, the family structure doesn't actually matter. I just talk about this as far as biological physiology and evolution, but the structure of the family matters less than the positive involvement from birth on. I am going to go a bit into postpartum depression, and then we'll talk about the precede-proceed model. So postpartum depression, we all have kind of baby blues, most likely. I remember taking my twins to a bakery to kind of celebrate them being big sisters, and then my hormones shifting or whatever, and I started sobbing in the cupcake shop, and I just grabbed my cupcakes and my daughters, and we went outside because I just felt so sad in that moment. Even though I was happy and I was enjoying my child and I was loving being a family of 5, you can have these baby blues, but really for postpartum depression, the signs and symptoms are really intense and they last longer. And a lot of these symptoms that I'm talking about really matter because they can impact your ability to not only do daily tasks, but care for your child. So some depression symptoms: depressed mood, severe mood swings, excessive crying, difficulty bonding with the baby. And this is a big one: not wanting to hold your child, wanting everybody else to hold the child, having them sit in a bouncer or a bugaboo all day and you don't want to hold them. Withdrawal from your family and friends. You don't want them to come over. You're not listening to text. You're not responding to texts or phone calls, and not wanting people to come over. A lot of times it's that fatigue and loss of energy that's really similar with regular depression as well, where you just kind of want to sleep away the whole day and not get up. Interest, and then you don't have your interest in pleasure and activities you used to enjoy, and more aptly that this new child has entered your picture and you don't want to have anything to do with the child. Irritability and anger, so little things that are happening that could set you off. You spill the milk. You have to wake up in the middle of the night and take care of the child. If that's leading to intense irritability and anger directed at the child, your partner, or yourself. Fear that you're not a good mother, and these feelings of like shame and guilt and inadequacy, and then kind of becomes this cycle. You don't want to deal with the baby, then you feel bad that you don't want to hang out with the baby, then you don't hang out with the baby, then you feel bad, and it's like this constant kind of cycle. Then ability to kind of think diminishes quite rapidly as well. You can't make decisions in the next 5 minutes. You're just kind of getting through the day-to-day motions that you need to. And then there can lead to anxiety and panic attacks. And then the last two are the really, really serious, where it's like, just go ahead and call a healthcare professional or get somebody to urgent care or the hospital. If they're having thoughts about harming themselves or a baby, or they have recurrent thoughts about death or suicide, these are like the really important ones where we don't even want another day to go by. We want to involve healthcare professionals in getting treatment for this mother and for the child as well. There is postpartum psychosis. It's very, very, very rare, but it's very, very serious. People who kill their children almost always have postpartum psychosis from completely untreated postpartum depression. So why do we care, besides just as a society wanting people to feel better and take care of their children? So if you have postpartum depression, it can compromise a child's development. So you're not playing with your child, you're not interacting with your child, you're not making eye contact with them. So you're going to be less able to nurture them, and that's going to affect their well-being. So as Erickson kind of talks about trust versus mistrust, that my needs are being met, not only the physical needs, but my social and emotional needs as well. So it's really important that we have the parents in their best mental state so that they can take care of children to increase that development. So the postpartum depression and the precede-proceed model. The precede model is used in health promotion settings, And we're really looking at guiding the interventions that aim to look at and change health-related behaviors. So what we're kind of looking for is that in this case, they were gathering data and they had designed a questionnaire based on this pre-seed, post-seed model. And it was looking at behaviors such as, like I said, in the pre-seed model, the predisposing factors, the enabling factors, and the reinforcing factors. So that's the pre and the pre-seed. And so what they were looking at is they were looking at 230 pregnant women in the northeast section of Iran, and through questionnaires and through kind of a literature review of the data, they were looking at people's knowledge and beliefs about postpartum depression, what kind of resources they had available, what kind of ecological kind of assessments that were there. So if somebody was saying, I'm really sad and it's 6 weeks after the birth, what kind of happens then? And then the reinforcing factors. So what do family members think about postpartum depression, and what do peers think about postpartum depression over in Iran, in the northeast section of Iran? And then they were kind of looking at 230 pregnant women. So how can we use the pre-seed, proceed model to look at and examine ecological kind of influence on how we identify postpartum depression? So that's an interesting study that I will also have linked for you guys on Cougar courses. It is a little bit wonky, so it's not really it's not a fantastic read, so it's not a required for reading for this week, but if this was an area that you were interested in, you can look at it, but I am not requiring it because it's definitely more of a literature review and I think there were some translation issues as well, so I had a little bit of a difficulty really getting into the meat of it myself, but I did want to link for people who might be interested in this, might be an area that they're interested in. Then we're going to jump right into cognitive development. So we're going to look at the theorist or language development, early intervention and special needs, and how that relates to the pre-seed post-seed model. I know this is probably a really long lecture. I love babies. I work with babies. I have a lot of knowledge about babies. I'm trying to kind of edit myself, and I try every semester, put new things in, take things out. But I just want to touch real fast. I know that you've had child development classes before, but I did want to talk on some of the early developmental theorists. So Skinner is our guy with his pigeons. He was renowned for having his pigeons. And then the other guy with the awesome mustache is Pavlov. So classical conditioning, operant conditioning, negative and positive reinforcements. We still use this today in potty training, or just kind of, it really starts from anything. So a child sees their parents, and the child babbles, the parent smiles, and they babble back. They use that parent ease, that and the child receives positive reinforcement, and they babble more to gain attention and love. So we still use this unconsciously, and then so that we are kind of, from the moment a child is born, we are still kind of encouraging their development through some of these kind of behaviorist approaches. Because then there's the flip side, a child babbles, their parent is depressed, they don't respond, the child tries to get attention, maybe they ramp it up, they cry, but if the attention in the parent ease and the verbal ability to respond to your child is not there, then the child's going to give up and they're going to stop babbling or trying to reach out to their child, to their parent in that way, and that will change their development, that'll change their brain growth as well. Psychometric approaches, and I just bring this up because sometimes the pre-seed, proceed model uses these, and I use these as well in my work in order to look at cognitive ability and get a very specific developmental range for a child. So in my work, I use the Hawaii Early Learning Profile, or the GESEL, which are older ways of looking at children's cognitive ability and ability over all domains. But it's important in my lane of work because then I can give a social worker or a therapist or a school district a specific information. I can say that a child in their fine motor ability is 17 months old, or between 18 and 20 months old, or in their physical development, they're 31 months old, something like that. it's a good way to try to roughly understand their cognitive ability and then provide appropriate support, therapy, or services. And the pre-seed proceed model will use things similar to this in order to indicate that there is a delay or an issue in a domain, and then make sure that services are appropriate. So Piaget, I think it would be remiss if we were talking about development and I didn't talk about Erikson or Piaget at all. So Jean Piaget, our Swiss theorist, birth to age 2 is our sensory motor stage, and so we know that we're moving from beyond those reflexes. So I was talking before about the Brazelton scale, which is looking at reflexes and just basic motor ability. So now they can actually have active exploration. They can bat things in an activity gym. They can turn their head, placed on their stomach. They should be able to turn their head as well, maybe get up, try to push up, stuff like that. So they are learning about themselves and their environment by using their motor skills and their sensory processing abilities. So lights turn on, lights turn off, people make sounds, people talk to me, my eyes open, my eyes close, I see things, I can move things. That is how I am learning in the first couple months. And then as I can roll over, crawl, walk, run, that pull up, that changes the ability of things that I can get my hand on, that I can orally motor explore as well. I do want to bring up object permanence because it does start in this infancy stage as well. So it can start as young as 8 months and it goes all the way until they're 24 months old. So that's when you can be able to play peekaboo, and it's really, really funny for an 8-month-old because mommy disappears. Mommy comes back, mommy disappears, mommy comes back. But into their toddlerhood, they should be able to start to understand that you don't disappear just because I can't see you anymore. And that's kind of the big idea about object permanence, but it starts in our infancy period. So here it is. So, you know, the interesting thing is, that it starts around 3 months, but we are seeing more of the signs of it at 8 months. That's when it becomes funny that mommy disappears, or the teddy bear is still there even though I can't see it. And then we're learning that objects and people who are no longer visible doesn't mean that they cease to exist, and this is a big kind of cognitive jump for children and toddlers as well. Information processing, so this is looking at perception, memory, and problem solving specifically within our brain, so habituation, categorization, and causality. Piaget was the first one to kind of look at these 3 areas, and specifically categorization. We know that it starts really, really young. So infants can do it at 3 to 4 months old. Piaget thought that it happened in toddlerhood, but we are now knowing that by children staring at certain categories, or when adults sort things into categories, they're realizing it at a very, very young age. And we're looking at that at kind of that habituation. How long are they staring at the objects that have been sorted? And that kind of lets us know that they know that there's differences in the sorting and differences in the objects. And then causality as well. They begin to figure this out very, very early. We have kind of mobiles and activity gyms that have a foot component to it. Some of them look like pianos, or some of them are old school. Actually, like a ribbon is attached to a bell on a mobile, and the more that the baby kicks, the more that the bell happens, and they can start to figure that out. Same with the more sophisticated ones that have little pianos. They know that they can hit that with their feet, and that will make music. So that they begin to do that before they can even sit up, so under 6 months as well. So we know that children have perception and some early memory and problem solving ability as well. So our social contextual approach. So this is kind of really Vygotsky. So Lev Vygotsky, our Russian theorist, who actually was born in the same year as Piaget. Piaget lived well until the 1980s, whereas Vygotsky died in the 1930s in Russia, and a lot of his work hasn't been released or translated out of Russian. So we only have kind of his early ideas, but he definitely was one of the first people to write down that we think that culture affects social and language development. And he was really interested in language and development and how children kind of construct meaning through their language ability. So I was talking about parent ease, so the which is also called mother ease, which is kind of the sing-song tones. And we highlight really important words. So we sing twinkle, twinkle, little star. Like then when you're hearing children, they'll typically repeat the most prominent word or the highlighted word in songs. I have this picture of a couple of women from Papua New Guinea because they have less of this kind of special consideration when it comes to highlighting important words or having that sing-song tones. They typically have full-blown conversations with the child, or the child will sit on somebody's lap and the person behind them will take on the role of the child, so they will respond with words as if they are the child. So it's a little bit different of a social setup for language, but their language ability proceeds at the same ability that ours does, because language develops very similar, because it's more of the exposure to language that is important, not the specific way how. We can give people a lot of really specific ways that have to do with our culture, and we can support language development, but it's really the exposure to language, especially in the infant period, that's so important. So types of language is just receptive. So that's what you hear and understand. And then there's the expressive. So how you can speak and communicate. So you need to hear babbling by 3 months. And then by the time they're 2 to 3 years old, they're combining 3 to 4 word sentences. So receptive language is pointing to body parts, following commands. So, looking, if somebody gives you a bottle and says, drink your milk, that type of stuff, or even kind of using signs. Sign language is really important. I breastfed my daughter and we taught her a little bit of sign language as well. So kind of like more, help, and then milk. And that was actually what she called me her first year of life. So when I would come into the room, she would sign milk. At first I thought that meant that she wanted to nurse, but that actually we kind of figured out was just kind of what she called me, because I was the one who fed her most of the time. So how they use their receptive and expressive language in the first couple months just is really important. And like I said, it is directly correlated with how much exposure to language. So who is talking to them throughout their lives. So early intervention and special needs. So some are delays. Delays are evident at birth. So this is kind of Down syndrome, things like that we can are readily apparent at birth. Some delays will become evident as their child develops, and we see that there are delays in specific needs. So hopefully a pediatrician will refer to a social services group like the county or First 5 in order to get early intervention services started. Some red flags in the first couple months: they don't crawl or sit up by a year. They're not walking by 18 months. They don't make sounds or babble. Specifically, babbling is really important. Or have a word by 1 year old. They don't combine words by 2 years old. They don't make eye contact with people around them, or they don't point in airplanes. So even a very young child is going to see something unusual and they'll start to point at 7 or 8 months old, or try to get your attention. So a child might like bang blocks and then look to you to see, look, I'm banging blocks, or I'm clapping my hands. So if they're not doing that, that's a red flag socially and emotionally. Or stacking blocks, nesting cups, or starting to have object permanence or some cognitive issues as well. So the precede proceed model in special needs in infancy. So it's used as a conceptual framework for a lot of different health promotion programs, and 5 major target areas that I've kind of seen are oral motor difficulties and feeding. It's very specific occupational therapy and speech therapy goals that they have. Dental treatment of people with disabilities, skin-to-skin contact after birth, and then autism planning, policy, and community intervention programs. So there's a program called Project Impact that I was a clinician for, a joint program between Rady's and UCSD, and they used they used this as a framework for some of their work kind of in very young children, so 1 to 2 year olds, looking at kind of the second part, so the proceed part, and kind of how they can set up really effective assessments. They didn't use this really strictly, but it has been used as a model or a framework. Then we're going to go physical development and health, because it's really, really important. That first kind of months are really important for early development, making sure that they're growing so rapidly, but it's unmatched by kind of cognitive reasoning. So they're being able to grow, they're going from an infant all the way to a 1 year old. It's a huge, astounding physical jump, but they probably don't have that social ability or that cognitive ability, a little bit unmatched, which can make the late infancy stages a little bit difficult as they're moving their body. They're much more mobile, but their cognitive abilities are there. So health and wellness. it's the most important thing with health and wellness is that the parent is regulating. So if they're regulating sleep and they're regulating eating, the child has very little control over this. We set them up by having regular nap schedules and sleeping through the night, and we provide the food for them. So we're really looking at the adults' healthy behaviors and their ability to pass it on to the child to encourage their growth and development. So that's where the pre-seed, post-seed model typically comes in with infant health and wellness, is by looking at what the parents are providing. Because we know that infants and toddlers inherit their body type and their height and weight and things like that, or kind of a lot of physical characteristics from their parent. But the healthy habits that they get, what they're getting in that first few years are from their parents, and most likely how their parents were raised. So like for Venus Williams, she inherited, I think she's like 6'1", 6'2", so she's really quite tall, and she has really unparalleled kind of physical strength and ability. But she was also out on the tennis courts from a very, very young age, and that early practice is what made her kind of an amazing tennis star. So we need to look at what a child is born with, but then how they are encouraged in that by their families. So, well, child checkups, I've harped on this a lot, but access to quality healthcare prenatally and then after a child is born, it's really important to look at those milestones and be able to developmentally screen them so that they are meeting their developmental potential. And then if there's any health risks as well, that those are also figured out. My child had hip dysplasia, and we didn't actually find out until she was 12 months old, which is a little unusual for hip dysplasia. It was mild to moderate, but I would not have known that if I hadn't gone to well child checkups and we hadn't kind of had these hip issues. Nutrition, once again, breastfeeding or formula feeding and the access to formula feeding or enough calories in order to breastfeed. So it's an issue in other parts of the world. Breastfeeding is, I think, what did the World Health Organization, I think it's 500,000, and that's a very low estimate. Children die of malnutrition in the first year, either because their parent can't breastfeed for them or they don't have access to adequate or sanitary formula feeding. So areas like Yemen, that's going through a famine right now, are having issues with this type of stuff. But then after that, in our first year, we're providing purees and then maybe some finger foods, like, you know, just little things that they can pick up and use their pincer grasp and put in their mouth in order to explore taste and textures. That's really what we're looking for. And once again, this is what the parent provides for the child. The child most likely isn't foraging around their house for this type of stuff. So this is where our areas of intervention are targeted in what does a parent know about nutrition, what can they actually financially provide for their child, and how could we support that with community interventions. SIDS and safe sleep, I've talked about this, but putting your child on their back in a crib that has a hard surface with nothing around it, no pillows or no stuffed animals. I see quite a bit of unsafe sleep in my work in early intervention. But we know that SIDS happens, and it's a biological issue, and we know that there are some risk factors, and that's why we have people put their child to sleep on the back, that there's no pillows, bumpers, blankets, or stuffed animals. And then a new recommendation as well is that there's a room with a fan on so that air is circulating and it's not really stuffy. Some people do bed share, and I do want to bring up that there are some risk factors with that. Domestic violence, so if there's a history of domestic violence, there should not be any bed sharing. Any sort of alcohol or tobacco use in any type. So vaping, marijuana use, or tobacco use, and then alcohol, even a glass of wine or anything like that. Multiple people in a bed, so multiple members of families, and then infants under age of 11 weeks, so very, very young children as well. So these are kind of some risk factors that people should be looking at when they're making the decision to bed share. We do know that SIDS does affect premature babies, African American babies, Native American babies, teen mothers, and those who received no prenatal care. And that's where it's more common. There's still a lot of research into specifically why. Is it socioeconomic status? Is it access to health care? what is, what are premature babies, teen mothers, Native Americans, African Americans all have in common that could be leading to SIDS. And this is an area where I also think the pre-seed, proceed model, through some kind of literature review or questionnaires, could be really an interesting starting point for examining issues and why SIDS affects certain populations. Immunizations, I was talking earlier about the whooping cough, so that everybody is protected around the child who can't start to receive the first immunization until they're 3 months old, but aren't fully immunized until they're 1 year old. They are required in childcare in California as of 2016, so you do need to have it, or you need to have a doctor saying that you cannot receive it by signing it. I do want to just bring up that immunizations do not cause autism. Any of the studies that you see have been debunked. There was a very famous one from the early 2000s with Wakefield. He's been disbarred. There was a movie about him. We shouldn't give him any more attention. They do not cause autism. You cannot look at 12 people at a birthday party and call that a research study. It is really important, though, for herd immunity. So I have children that I work with early intervention-wise who have had heart attacks. I'm working with one now who's had 3 heart surgeries, and he's 7 months old. He cannot have live vaccinations at this point. He's just left the hospital in the last couple of weeks. So as a society, we need to protect him by having herd immunity. So most of the people around him and most of the people in his society have been immunized, but we're not passing it on to him. I also want to bring on about hepatitis A and whooping cough. So hepatitis A is a huge area right now. I work closely with foster care and some homeless families, homeless youth. It's highly contagious. I think over 30 people have died. Thousands have been infected. For me specifically, Oceanside, where I live and where I work, has been very hard hit as well. Whooping cough as well. I was exposed to this 3 years ago in my own job down in South Bay, San Diego, where I was working at the time. But Oceanside and South Bay, and so I mean like Chula Vista and National City, are regularly affected. And a local infant died in July of 2016. That's when my own daughter was born. So pregnant women and those in her family should get the vaccination because, like I said, early children, young children when they're first born are not vaccinated against it regularly and they don't have full immunization until they're 1 year old. So as a society and as people who work with young children, so if you're going into this, you should be immunized as well so that you're not passing it on to children. So one of the areas that I saw looking at health habits of infants and more specifically their parents was how to increase breastfeeding rates by using the pre-seed proceed model as a framework. So looking at the ecological factors surrounding people who choose to breastfeed or choose not to breastfeed, education, ability levels, socioeconomic status, how does that impact a person's ability to breastfeed within that first year? So I'm going to talk real fast about the first year and kind of the rapid physical growth. I have a lot of pictures since this is an online class. If you were in a lecture with me, I would actually be rolling around on the floor, getting up, showing you atypical crawls, so kind of the funky crawls. But since this is a lecture online, I have to give you a lot of pictures. So in the first 3 months, they are holding people's hands. It's a reflex. And then I put a lot of pictures of tummy time. So we're putting children down on their tummies as much as possible. Most of my children were like that screaming child. I don't like this. I don't want to do this. So by putting activity gyms or a rolled up towel underneath their chest, we're starting to encourage them to do it because it's really important to have that head control and be able to use your arms and elbows, prop up, push up, so that you can start to roll and crawl. And then in prone, so lying on your back, you're kicking your legs, you're putting your legs on the ground, and you can kind of do the bridge pose where your pelvis comes up. And then you can hold on to rattles or hold on to hands, grasp intentionally, and start to bring it to your mouth, and oral motorly explore that as well. So that's what they're doing in those first 3 months. 3 to 6 months, they should be rolling over. They should be what that mom is doing. She's got the little fairy, the little girl that's dressed up like a fairy. You should be able to support your legs when you're held upright. Most of your body weight, you should be able to support yourself. So if you're really floppy or we were seeing some areas of physical development, you wouldn't be able to do that. You have head control, so you can be held up at somebody's shoulder and your head's not wobbly all of the time. You have more increased head control. You can reach out for toys with purpose. You can start to bat and grab them as well and hold them and bring them to your mouth. Oral motor exploration is hugely important in these first couple months. You should be able to grab onto things and bring it to your mouth. It doesn't matter if you could spit on it, you wash it and you put it back. And that's how a child learns about their environment, is grabbing things and exploring it in their mouth. 6 to 9 months, we should see children being able to sit up by themselves. They should be able to spend a lot of time on their tummy, and they should be able to push themselves all the way up and grab with one hand, so that and then getting into the crawl position from their stomach, getting back to the sitting position from the crawl position. And they're interested in being mobile and reaching for toys and objects, and maybe even crawling to go ahead and get those objects, grasping them, holding onto them, moving them from hand to hand, shaking them around, and even patting them. Patting them together. 9 to 12 months, they're crawling, they're pulling to stand, they're cruising furniture. So that little girl around that coffee table, she's holding on. Our first steps might happen in these couple months, but it's okay if it happens after the first year. They're using their fingers and their hands. That little boy in the top image is using his pincer grasp in order to pick up a puff or a Cheerio and put it in his mouth. So that we can feed ourselves, but we can also start to use our fine motor ability as we're crawling, and we're increasing our shoulder strength and our shoulder ability. And that's why crawling is so important. If you are a future occupational therapist or physical therapist, crawling is a really, really important skill. It unites both sides of our brains, and it sets us up for some really good brain and cognitive development, in addition to physical development as well. Encouraging physical development, putting babies on the ground. So we see a lot of children, it's called kind of compartmentalization, where they're in strollers and bumbos and swings and exercisers. So they're in a lot of things that are not people that they're holding on to. And so this is changing how children use their bodies. So it's still really important that we're putting them on the ground so that they have an ability to be mobile and to be able to move in their body in order to get space. So they need a space to roll, to crawl, to pull up, and have the ability to mouth toys that are safe for them. So plastic or wooden toys that are safe, if that's okay, that's how they learn, is by putting them in their mouth. Young toddlers, so early walking and moving, sharp corners, or even children who are crawling or pulling to stand, sharp corners are padded, and they are given the ability to work and walk and roll on kind of uneven surfaces, so grass with a blanket, that type of stuff. No iPad for the first year, and very limited or very rarely until age 3. We're doing a lot of studies, and I can't say for sure, so that's kind of why my blanket recommendation is as little iPad and TV in the first couple months. We're not sure how children's brains are affected by these new technologies, and until we know how we can safely use them, it's most likely better that children talk to actual humans, they respond to them, the human responds back to them, and we can work on that social and emotional development. So when we're talking about a social and emotional development for our infants, we're really kind of looking at temperament types, because a lot of our personality hasn't developed. We haven't been in our environment for that long. It hasn't acted on us, and we haven't acted on it. But most children come out with some kind of temperament type. So they're flexible, they're fearful, and they're feisty. So the flexible is very regular, they're very adaptable, they're not your screamers, and they're not super fearful. You put them in a new situation and they might want to sit next to you, but they're going to probably go out and actively explore their environment. They might come back to you, but they're quite regular. Fearful, they adapt slowly, they withdraw. So in new situations, they're going to need to sit with mom, or they're going to have a difficulty going into childcare, or they're going to need longer in order to do that because they respond warily to new situations or new people. And then feisty is intense reactions. So intensely happy, intensely sad, intensely mad, crying, yelling, laughing, all of those things. They need a lot of time and warning. So if something new is going to happen, they need a lot of time to handle the transition, and most likely a warning as well. So most people come out with a temperament type that we can put into this. I have two flexibles and a feisty in my own household, and I've definitely seen how that changes how I respond to them as a caregiver. So what I do to my flexible child is not what I do to my feisty child. They need different interactions with me. They need different routines and different transitions as well. That's where this kind of idea of goodness and fit comes in. So in that first year, you have responsive caregiving. So what a feisty child or a slow to warm up child needs, they might need more routine. They might need more coaching than a child that is considered easy. So who you are as a parent changes through your child's developmental stages, and it should also change with the type of temperament that your child has. Since we are the adult, we're ultimately responsible for changing most of our behavior, and this is where we see a lot of issues, is that if somebody didn't have their own model in their own life of responsive caring, responsive caregiving, then that might set the parent up for having some difficulties if they haven't had it modeled in their own life, or if they are just kind of struggling with changing their own behaviors in order to meet the demands of their own child. That might be an area where we need to involve some social services, and the pre-seed proceed model, once again, would probably be good at setting up community intervention programs that help parents learn how to be responsive caregivers. And there are some programs through First Five, there's parenting classes through school districts that they help you make sure that you know how to parent your child and make changes based on their developmental level, which is, you know, constantly changing. Some of the major theorists of our first social emotional part of infancy is Erik Erikson, and then Bowlby and Ainsworth. So this is our legendary Erik Erikson with his awesome bolo tie, but he has all of his stages, most likely where there's 7 of them, and the first one is trust. So trust versus mistrust. So you cry, somebody picks you up. You're hungry, somebody feeds you. You have a poopy diaper, somebody cleans it up. You are forming your attachments and your relationships based on somebody taking care of your most basic needs. If you don't have that, if you cry and nobody picks you up and comforts you, if you're hungry and nobody feeds you or they don't feed you enough, then that is what you're going to learn is that the world around you is not safe. It's very inconsistent if your needs are met. I work with foster care children, and I work with children who are removed from incarcerated parents, where because of life situations, or, you know, in one case, the parents were drug dealers and drug users. So their earlier experiences were not one of consistent care. It really depended on the situation. It depended on who was in the house, who took care of that child. So we are having to go back and we are needing to teach that child that through warm and responsive and caring relationships, that your needs will be met and you can trust the world around you. So for a toddler and a 3-year-old, we are having to go back and we're having to teach them something that they should have learned as an infant. This also has to play with John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth work in the 1900s about the importance of caregiver and parent-child bonds. So Bowlby was really interested in the Blitz in London during World War II, when children had to leave their primary caregivers and go to farms. How did that hurt or hinder or help some children? So some children went to farm families that had responsive caregiving and some did not. And this, John Bowlby noticed, led to some difficult behaviors with some children in the 1950s and 1960s. One of his students, Mary Ainsworth, took this information and she actually went to Uganda, China, and Israel. So she was looking at secure attachment over a bunch of different cultures, and that kind of taught us and showed us that this wasn't just an issue in England during World War II. This is attachment and the importance of having close attachment with someone who cares about you is really, really important, and it crosses cultural barriers as well. So we really want children to have these close attachments with us. If not, it can lead to avoidance or anxiety. So avoidant would be that you don't want to have anything to do with your caregiver because you don't know what kind of care you are, or you have anxiety about the consistency of the care. Is it going to be supportive this time, or is it not going to be supportive this time? It's most likely it needs to be as secure as possible for most of the time, so you know that when you are hurt, somebody picks you up and they're not blaming you about it, or they're blaming you this time. That inconsistency is what leads to a lot of anxiety or avoidant behaviors. So I'm going to talk about children across cultures once again, because we've kind of noticed that children socially and emotionally develop when they have strong caregivers who love and respond to their basic needs, that we all kind of develop in a similar way. We do prioritize different emotions and emotional responses. For example, in Poland and Eastern European countries, negative emotions like sadness or melancholy or anger are much more tolerated and encouraged than in the United States, where we're much more positive and we want to see children much more happier. And when things are sad, we want to change it and make it better immediately. Where in Poland, you might just kind of sit with those emotions and just kind of recognize that sometimes life sucks. So we prioritize different emotions, but for the most part, we socially develop in similar ways. So in the first couple months, how does a child socially and emotionally develop? They have those various stages of arousal. They're asleep or they're awake or they're angry because they need something. So they communicate with us by yelling, and they begin to smile socially, and this is a huge one. This is kind of a reward for those sleepless nights of your newborn, is the first time that they kind of smile at you, and everybody is just so excited. And they're starting to look around. They're starting to explore their environment more visually when they are awake. 3 to 6 months, they're starting to anticipate what might happen next. So mommy lifts up her baby's shirt and she blows raspberries on the baby's tummy. They might know, like, when, oh, my shirt's coming up, I'm gonna get raspberries. They're smiling, they're cooing, they're laughing, those belly laughs. And they're communicating with us by their cooing, and they're smiling when they're happy, and when they're angry or sad, they're crying or yelling. This is their basic form of communication to tell us what they need. As they start to explore their environment by rolling and starting sitting up as well, that's teaching them more about the environment and how they can change the environment around them by picking up things and exploring it. 6 to 9 months, they should be babbling to other human beings and playing social games. As they learn that object permanence, peekaboo becomes really funny. They show emotions like surprise, joy, or frustration, so they're becoming more nuanced. They're not just mad because they have a poopy diaper, or they're mad because they're not fed and they're going to yell. They're going to show things like surprise. So when you're doing social games, what, there's a monkey in that box, or joy or frustration. So when you stop them from getting under the desk and playing with the iPad cords, they're showing frustration that I really want to chew on this. Why aren't you letting me chew on an iPad cord? And so as their mobility increases, their ability to explore and adapt to the environment around them increases as well. And then 9 to 12 months, this might be the start of stranger anxiety, so that they want to be next to their parent or caregiver, and when new people enter into their environment, they might be shy or avoid it. And they might show low emotional affect in outside environments. Not all children, but some children do. They go out into the world and they're a little bit unsure about it. Now they know that they've explored enough, that they're learning about their environments. They might show just their kind of that resting bitch face for an infant when they go out into their outside environments while they're learning about how it changes. So if you're taking them to a museum for the first time, this is a new environment to them, so they've got kind of that RBF as they're learning about different environments that they're being exposed to. They can be ambivalent about others or activities. So things that they really liked before, they now have less interest in, and so they might want to be more mobile. They might want to run, crawl, and get into things that they normally didn't have the ability to do, or they might do the same book or activity over and over and over again. I think I've read this one hippo book to my 11-month-old like 50 times a day. It was her favorite book. She knew where it was. I tried to hide it one time and she pulled every book off of the bookshelf. She wasn't even walking. She was a crawler at this point, looking for this damn hippo book, because it was something that socially and emotionally she wanted to explore every single day, and I just kind of had to roll with it. And I started making up my own words to keep it a little bit engaging for me. It doesn't really matter what your kind of how you're playing with the child. It just kind of that you are enjoying and you're providing responsive caregiving to them. So I kept that fresh to myself by putting in my own words and phrases. So how would we use the precede proceed model as a case study? So I do kind of each time want to bring you through the pre-seed phase. So we're looking at an Iranian study that I will also have on Cougar courses for you. And really what this is developing and evaluating an instrument for measuring factors for skin-to-skin contact. So in the image that would be on the right-hand side is that very first phase. That first one is the outcome. So they're looking at skin-to-skin contact. So then their health, the phase 2, the epidemiological, so the health beliefs, looking at what do midwives, so 450, almost 500 midwives in Tehran, think about skin-to-skin contact. And they did this through focus groups. So sitting down with a bunch of nurses and midwives and asking them, what do you think about skin-to-skin contact right after children are born? So still in the hospital, have just delivered. Should we encourage skin-to-skin contact or not? Then the environment, so we're still in phase 2, the epidemiological assessment. So in Tehran, which is quite an urban environment, looking at 3 hospitals in different parts of the country, so different socioeconomic statuses of the people who both work there and the populations that they serve. Are they using skin-to-skin contact? What do they think about it? What are their attitudes towards skin-to-skin contact with behavior? And then in phase 3, our educational ecological assessments, what's the education? So we know we're looking at trained midwives or nurses. So they were documenting their educational levels, and then they were doing ecological assessments as well of both the hospital and then also Tehran as itself and the hospital environment of those 3 hospitals that they had chosen in different parts of the country. So each kind of week I want to take something and I want to break it down so that these very first parts, typically phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, we can kind of break down so we can see how in a specific age group, so newborns, just born, how are they being impacted by skin-to-skin contact in Iran in an urban environment. So it gets really, really small. We're looking at our specific communities, and a lot of my work has been done in the North County, specifically Oceanside, San Marcos, although I've worked in Poway as well. But I definitely have a community, and I'm very involved in my community, and so I can talk a lot about the issues that children being raised in Southern California are definitely looking at. But I also want to bring this out because I think pre-seed, proceed can be used in a variety of different communities, and that's why we have the ecological and the epidemiological part of this, is that we're looking at our environment and we're looking at the ecology that we're being raised in so that we can evaluate different types of factors that impact children. So we know that skin-to-skin contact is good for children, either if they have issues after they were born or just to promote bonding. So we know that we have these factors that we should do. We should have skin-to-skin contact. That is our outcome. But we're looking at beliefs and attitudes in different parts of a specific community in order to see, why isn't this being done? Why is it being done? Is it being done in certain parts of the city and not in other parts of the city? So I think the pre-seed, proceed model is a really strong framework for looking at how we can make very small measurable changes in our community to affect the well-being and outcome of children. So this was my lecture on infancy. I know it was a bit long. This is definitely my wheelhouse. I love infants. I'm that person in the grocery store who's, if there's a young baby, I'm stopping you and I'm talking about them. This is the work that I do, and I love to talk about it with other people. So that was my lecture on infants. If you have any questions or you'd like to talk to me about infants, either professionally or if you're looking to go into early intervention or therapy and you'd like to kind of chat with me and pick my brain about infants, please email me and we can definitely set up a time to do that.